Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Kid writer falls in love with writing, falls out of love with writing, falls in love with philosophy, then comes back to her first love. There's a nice narrative arc to that.
All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am.
Would your life make a great memoir?
Does it have to in order to be meaningful?
How exactly do you tell the story of your life?
Who exactly is the audience?
Is the narrator even reliable?
But these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to.
We're faced with this big hot mess. We're going to necessarily end up with a story that's in some ways a simplification, in some ways false.
Our guest is Helena de Bres, author of Philosophy in the First Person.
Narrative and the Meaning of Life.
Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Would your life make a great memoir?
Does it have to in order to be meaningful?
Can you really tell your story without fudging the facts?
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ray Briggs.
And I'm Josh Landy. We're coming to you via the studios of KALW San Francisco Bay Area.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus, where Josh teaches philosophy.
And at the University of Chicago, where Ray teaches philosophy.
Today, we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life.
Meaning of life? What meaning of life, Ray? We're all just atoms in the void.
No, come on, you don't think life has any meaning? That's pretty bleak. Why even bother getting up in the morning if that's what you think?
Well, there's satisfactions to be had and people to help, but none of that gives life meaning.
Wait, say more about this helping people thing. If life is really meaningless, why aren't you just selfish?
I don't want to be selfish, but that doesn't have anything to do with meaning. I mean, helping other people gets me out of bed, sure, and it makes me feel like I'm not totally wasting my time on Earth, but what does that have to do with meaning?
Josh, that is meaning. A meaningful life is just one that's worthwhile. Sure, there might be pains and sacrifices. You have to get up in the middle of the night to take your friend to the hospital. But ultimately, it's all worth it because your life has meaning.
Well, okay, if that's all meaning is, then sure, but I don't see what narrative has to do with it.
Okay, think about the example of taking your friend to the hospital. What could possibly redeem the pain of having to wake up in the middle of the night? Well, it's that it's part of a narrative. Your friend was in trouble, they reached out to you, you took them to the hospital, and they felt better. It's a little story. And the ending of the story gives meaning and purpose to the stuff earlier on.
I just don't get why you need a story. What matters is that my friend needed help and they got it. Surely the rest is incidental.
Is it, though? Imagine that it happens a different way. Your friend calls you up and you just go back to sleep, but a stranger finds them and takes them to the hospital. In that story, they still get the help they need, but you're not living your life very well.
But why is it all about me? I mean, isn't this my friend's story? I feel like there's something a little narcissistic in thinking that my friend's pain is just part of my life narrative.
Look, I'm not saying your narrative is all that matters, but we were talking about what gives your life meaning. And the answer to that question is, well, it's living out a good story. Like the story where you help your friends in times of need instead of hanging up and going back to sleep.
Okay, maybe that's true for this one event, helping my friend in the middle of the night. That does make a nice little story. But my life, that doesn't make a nice little story. My life's been full of random noise and stops and starts and boring dead ends. No one's going to read that novel.
Yeah, speak for yourself, Josh. My memoir is going to be a bestseller.
Yeah, I believe you, actually. And I think there's a reason for that, which is you're going to be making it up, right? If you don't care about factual accuracy, it's easy to make a life seem exciting.
Excuse you. The notorious El Rio incident, that really happened.
Less said about that, the better.
Agreed. I'm saving it for the memoir. But the point is, I don't have to make things up. I can just report real events. When you put them together, you get a single coherent narrative, and that's what gives life meaning.
But I bet that story leaves a bunch of stuff out. All those boring faculty meetings, the gas bills you've paid, the buses you've waited for. I can't help thinking that this true story of yours is a bit abridged.
Well, I still think my life story is cool, and I bet our guest will agree with me. It's Helena de Bres, author of Narrative and Meaning in Life.
In the meantime, we sent our roving philosophical reporter, Holly J. McDeed, to learn about caregivers who are taking control of their own narratives through poetry. She files this report.
Her son tells it like this. When Brenda Sue Piñata met her future husband Frank decades ago, she came home with a smile on her face and a cheeriness in her step. As they grew older and Frank struggled with dementia, he still wrote her love letters. I was lucky to speak with Brenda Sue before she died, not long after her husband passed away. When they met, they were both math teachers.
He in Sacramento, me in Stockton, and he asked me to dance at a math conference gathering.
Frank had joined the Merchant Marines when he was 17. He and a buddy paid a man on the street some $20 to act as their father so they could fight in World War II. On one of their first dates, Frank flew Brenda Sue around in an airplane.
And I got sick and he had to land us, but that's another whole story.
They lived together in the town of Rescue, California, their little piece of heaven.
When he got really sick, gardening and journaling were my refuge places. He could sit on the deck and watch me. The deeper his dementia got, the more he needed to see me. He needed the comfort of knowing exactly where I was and that I could answer whatever his questions were.
She said caregiving for someone with dementia is like acting. You go along with their story.
We learn how to do therapeutic lies if it helps them. Say, things are okay, it's all right, or not get upset if they ask the same question 20 times.
But she also needed somewhere to release how she was feeling, so she joined a unique kind of poetry group just for caregivers. The group's leader, Francis Kakugawa, inspires caregivers in Sacramento to create meaning out of painful experiences through poetry. Brenda Sue remembers breaking down in tears when she met everyone.
All this time I thought I was totally alone and nobody in the whole world had ever done it before. I just broke down and cried a lot.
Writing poetry helped Brenda Sue slow down and appreciate the simple moments. She wrote a poem called Am I the Caregiver or the Receiver?
His memories from yesteryear remind me of our abundance, our history, our travel, our joyful dances through decades. His frequent naps gift me with solitude to know myself, catch up with chores, or read, or write without interruption.
In the poetry group, nothing was off limits.
We talk about things that you couldn't talk in normal company. If there's pee and poop, we talk the pee and the poop.
One of her poems took the shape of a help wanted ad.
Love and kindness required. Patience and listening a plus. Logic and reason don't exist.
We don't often hear stories that show the value of caregiving for people with dementia, or poetry that uses humor to capture the absurdity of aging.
Those are probably stories that aren't shared as often.
Kate McLean is a professor at Western Washington University. She studies how people recall and interpret their experiences in narrative form.
So perhaps it's an act of resistance or empowerment just to put them out into the ether, these experiences of caring for someone with dementia, which might begin to normalize or bring some empathy or compassion to that experience.
McLean also talks about the idea of master narratives, culturally shared stories that help provide a framework for how we understand ourselves.
And they also can be constraining if our experiences or identities don't fit within those storylines.
The caregiver poets create their own kind of master narratives. They write poems that reframe what it means to help loved ones age with dignity.
Well, she's my mother, so of course she's the most fantastic person to have ever lived. But everyone says that about her, so it's not just my bias.
That's Brenda Sue's son, Mike Smith. He lives in his mom's old house in Rescue, a home filled with her photographs and writing.
All the other writings that she has, I don't know what I'm going to do with. I feel like I should read them, but I don't know that I'll have enough lifetime to read them.
Mike reads one of his mom's poems, titled The Long Waltz.
We're dancing the long waltz, out of step, yet holding tightly to yesteryear. This long goodbye amplifies memories we treasure, and that we'd rather forget. We face eternity on a different schedule. Is this the day our dance stops? Well, I hear different music. create my own dance. Is there another dance yet to be learned, or will all the music stop? We've been saying goodbye for at least 10 years, and so every moment that she got with him was a gift, right? It was gravy on top.
Before she died, Brenda Sue had been working on a book, Dancing with Mr. P, Disco to Dementia. The title captures their story, poetic and filled with love from beginning to the end. For Philosophy Talk, I'm Holly J. McDede.
Thanks for that lovely report, Holly. That story was covered while Holly was with the Investigative Reporting Program at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism through a grant from the SCAN Foundation. I'm Josh Landy. With me is my fellow philosopher Ray Briggs, and today we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life.
We're joined now by Helena de Bres. She's professor of philosophy at Wellesley College and author of the forthcoming book, Philosophy in the First Person. Helena, welcome back to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be back here.
So, Helena, you've been thinking a lot about narrative and meaning, but how did you first get interested in that topic?
Well, when I was a kid, I wrote a lot of stories. I wrote, in particular, one very long novel when I went home from school every afternoon about a Victorian orphan who lived with her aunt and uncle in the countryside and had adventures. So I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. It was not a good novel, as most 12-year-old novels aren't. But then I totally lost that. I became a philosophy major. I went to grad school. I didn't read or write fiction, really tell any stories on paper for about 10 years. And then about 10 years ago, I wanted to reconnect with my earlier kid self and started writing memoir, personal essays and stories, a bit of fiction again. So there's a nice sort of narrative arc to that. Kid writer falls in love with writing, falls out of love with writing, falls in love with philosophy, dishes philosophy, and then comes back to her first love.
It's a romantic comedy.
It is. So now I write a lot of stories, including philosophy, but also a lot of personal narrative. So I've sort of integrated those two things in my life now.
So, Helena, how exactly does narrative connect to having a meaningful life?
Well, I don't think narrative is the whole story, so to speak, about meaning in life. Many different things can make a life meaningful: projects, valuable relationships, adventures of various kinds, contributions to social justice projects, a whole range of different things. But I do think that narrative is one part of what makes a life meaningful. I think one main way that it does that, it makes life more intelligible, more understandable, both to the person telling the story and to the people the story is told to. And I think understanding your life is an important part of seeing it as meaningful and have others recognize it as meaningful.
I'm kind of puzzled by the suggestion that I might fail to understand my own life. So don't I just understand it by living it?
Well, I think William James talked about the experience of an infant being faced by the world when they first arrive on the planet, and he called it a buzzing, booming confusion, right? There's all this massive sensations and experiences happening, and a kid has to learn how to filter through them, be more selective, somehow connect them to each other in a coherent way. So part of growing up is working out how to make sense of the world. And as we get older, we're taught to do that in part by telling stories about our experience and the experience of others. So storytelling, I think, is just one important human way to filter through the massive data and sensations that the world throws at us.
Makes sense. I mean, you gave a great example a moment ago where you talked about, at 12 you wrote a novel, and then that interest in writing fiction went away, but now it's kind of come back. This creative side of your life has come sort of roaring back. And my instant reaction was, okay, romantic comedy. So that's something we often do, right? We're able to put a very concise label on a large series of events over many years. So that seems to be a real value that narrative provides for us, to be able to conceive of enormous amounts of moments in time in 2 words. But presumably it also helps us to evaluate, right? To think not just what was this, but why was this? How was this? Was it a good thing? How should I think about the way I've lived my life so far? Is that part of what you're thinking, that narrative also allows me to decide, okay, is the life I've been living a good life?
Yeah, so a story isn't just a matter of stringing together a bunch of events in a kind of clinical manner. I think paradigmatic narratives also include an interpretation of those events that tries to portray their significance to an audience, right? So it's an evaluative exercise. It's not purely descriptive. And as you mentioned, one handy way to do this is to think about other pre-existing story forms. So every culture, every human culture has a set of conventions, themes, motifs, plot arcs. And when you're trying to work out what's going on in your own life, it might seem like a total mess to you. It's a handy shortcut to think about those kinds of shapes and those kinds of themes and arcs that you're familiar with within your own cultural heritage.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life with Helena de Bres from Wellesley College.
How do you tell the story of your life? Who exactly is the audience? Is the narrator even reliable?
Living lives and telling tales, along with your comments and questions when Philosophy Talk continues.
Every other founding father story gets told. Every other founding father gets to grow old.
And when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story? Who tells your story? Who tells your story?
You don't have to be a founding father to tell your story. I'm Josh Landy, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ray Briggs, and we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life with Helena de Bres, author of Philosophy in the First Person.
Got questions about what makes life meaningful? Email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. Or you can comment on our completely revamped website. And while you're there, you can also become a subscriber and find the narrative in our library of more than 600 episodes.
So, Helena, you've told us that narrative is important because it makes us intelligible to ourselves, but you said it also makes us intelligible to others. Can you tell us more about how it does that and why that's important?
Yeah. So you can just write a story for yourself, sitting at home, writing up some aspect of your life in your journal. But most of us tend to think that when we're telling a story, we're directing it at an audience of some kind. So we have some audience in mind. It might be an actual one or a hypothetical one. And why do we do that? I think it's part of the general human desire to not be alone in the universe, right? We all have this sense sometimes that we're isolated, that we're living our experiences, going through our troubles and joys solo. Telling a story is a way of trying to connect with other humans. So having them understand what you're going through, maybe understanding via your telling of a story to them that your experience is similar to theirs in certain ways. So it sets up a kind of conversation between you and your fellow humans. And I think that's really important to us as social beings.
Yeah, I mean, I like that a lot. Something else I think about is the temptation that many of us have to aggrandize ourselves, excuse ourselves, things like that. And whether having an actual or even imagined audience can tamp that down a little bit. I often think about Dostoevsky's novel Notes from Underground, where the main character is telling his story to himself, but telling it to an imaginary set of gentlemen. And he says, I purposely imagine an audience before me in order to conduct myself in a more dignified manner. I'll be able to criticize myself better. He's a strange being. But I kind of like this idea that if we at least imagine a potentially critical audience holding us to account and saying, what are you talking about? You aren't the hero that day. You were actually kind of miserable or whatever. Maybe that's a little bit of a nudge in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that connects to a really important point, which is that telling a story that isn't true about your life isn't going to make it more meaningful. It might increase your sense that your life is meaningful, but you can't really make your life meaningful by telling some totally fake story about it. So we do want our stories to track at least the main facts. We might get some things wrong. We're all limited in various ways. But we want our life stories to be roughly speaking true. And you're right, having this hypothetical audience that we're telling the story to is a way of sort of ensuring that we are responsible when doing that, getting a bit of fact-checking if people do in fact hear it. So yeah, I think that's a really important part of it as well.
So I definitely see the value of having your life narrative not be a lie. I wonder about completeness. Like, is completeness a virtue, or does it just give you too much junk and no filter?
No one wants to hear your complete life story, Ray. I mean, no offense. It'd be way too long, and some of it will be very
just
boring.
Just the El Rio episode.
Yeah, we want to hear that in detail and maybe filter out some of the rest of it. It's impossible to tell a full life story, so you do have to be selective. And some people worry about this. They think if you're picking and choosing different parts of your life, then you're going to be falsifying it, right? You're going to give this inaccurate representation of what happened. But actually, being selective in that way is a way of transmitting a different kind of understanding. I think it's a way of being more truthful. If you pick out things that seem more salient to you, you're better able to make connections between those things and other things and create this, framework of understanding, a digestible interpretation of what happened that isn't just a list of successive events. So selectivity is actually, I think, really crucial to a good story. It's not a sign that the story's gone wrong.
So I see how it transmits information about what's important in the story. Do you think that there's a kind of prior fact about what's important, or do I make things important by choosing to focus on them in my narrative?
Yeah, there's a couple of different views on that. So one view is that lives are already kind of story shaped, right? So your life has a certain kind of plot built into it. And when you tell a story about it, you're just describing that pre-existing plot, right? So there's an actual identifiable story that you're finding, discovering, and then relating. There's another take which says, no, that lives themselves don't really have a plot or arc. That arc is something that we create when we tell a story about them. So the story is an interpretation, it's adding some significance, but it's not completely divorced from what actually happened in the life. So I like that take, the idea that what matters is the shape of your life, but also the constructive act of telling a story about it, drawing out what seems important to you, highlighting certain kinds of values and events as being more significant than others. So it's a combination of the actual things that happened and also your own particular perspective on what happened.
I mean, people quote Ronquentin from Sartre's novel Nausea, who says, people talk about true stories as though there could be such things as true stories, because the very fact of ordering is itself falsifying. People talk about memory being unreliable. I want to throw in one other objection, which I think is maybe the most interesting, which is that even if you're getting the events correct, and even if your selection is sort of fair, the meaning of those events has a way of changing. Like, take your story that we started with. You wrote a novel when you were 12. Then you had the misfortune of becoming a philosopher. And now you're back. So, if you had told the same story 10 or 15 years ago, you might have said, I used to write this stuff as a kid, but it wasn't any good, and I'm not interested in that. Or, now I'm doing better stuff or something like that. But the meaning of that, even for you, if I'm not putting your words in your mouth, has changed. And that's true of a lot of things in our lives, that as new events happen and we make different choices, even though the events in the past remain the same, weirdly, they kind of get illuminated in different ways. So isn't there a potential worry that any story I'm telling right now is only kind of provisional, and the story I might tell about the very same sequence of events is going to be different in 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, for one thing I'd say is that I think there can be many different true stories told about a single, episode or stretch of life. Life is complicated, right? So there's different things that you can highlight. That doesn't mean that the different things are false. They can be consistent with each other. So that's one thing I'd say. I'm not too worried about stories changing over time, because I think what we're engaged in is this interpretive project. We're trying to make sense of our lives. It's very unlikely that we're going to get it all correct the first time. See it as sort of an ongoing attempt to get a grip on what's happening, right? We're faced with this big hot mess. We're going to necessarily end up with a story that's in some ways a simplification, in some ways false and error-ridden. But that's better than no story at all. If storytelling really is as crucial as I think it is to understanding our lives and communicating them to others.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today, we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life with Helena de Bres from Wellesley College. And we've got an email from Mike. Mike writes, "The purpose of life is whatever purpose you choose for your life." Helena, what do you think of that?
Everyone's tempted by that idea, I think, but I'm not sure that it really works. I do think that it matters which particular purpose you choose. Some purposes are going to be more rich and value-filled than others. Sometimes people don't like that. They think that it would be nice if we didn't have to make those discriminations, but I think it's just true. Like, think about a life of someone who spends their entire day just counting blades of grass on the back lawn, and then compare that life to a life that's dedicated to pursuing social justice, right? So the life of Martin Luther King I'd call myself an objectivist, a partial objectivist about meaning in life. It's not just a subjective matter. There are certain kinds of constraints on what lives are meaningful. But I also think there are many, many different kinds of meaningful lives possible. It's not like there's 5 and everyone else is getting it wrong. I think life is just filled with different potential, valuable, meaningful purposes. So you just got to pick one of those and not one of the ones that falls outside the category.
Okay, so Mike raised one version of existentialism, right? Give your own life your meaning. Here's another version of existentialism, Camus. Camus says life will be lived all the better if it has no meaning, which is a really interesting, bold claim. What do you say to something like that, right? So there's a whole tradition out there of saying, what are you doing asking for life to have meaning or my life to have meaning? Just live. And the more you're attached to meaning, according to Camus, the more you're kind of constraining yourself when you could be living all kinds of different lives and doing all kinds of different things and collecting experiences and having a very exciting life, but not a meaningful one.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the existentialists were doing, in part, was pushing back on a particular account of what lent meaning to life. So it was this, traditional cosmic story, a religious-based theistic picture of the universe as being, created by a divine being who gave each of us a task to pursue, right? So the divine purpose theory of meaning in life. So they didn't like that, I think, for good reasons. So we should ditch that and instead try and create meaning on a more human scale according to our own, purposes and values. I think that, you can still pursue meaning in the absence of some cosmic overarching meaning of the religious nature. And I think it's important for us to do that. It's very easy to read the existentialists as proposing an account of meaning rather than just ditching it. So I think those of us who are skeptical of there being an answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, can still be sympathetic to the idea that individual human lives can have meaning. They can be deeper, more purposeful, have more enduring value. In some forms than in others, and we should go for the ones that are more valuable and have more of a point.
Helena, we've got an email question from Mark in Aptos, California. So Mark writes, many people who maintain journals or diaries do so without any intention of turning them into memoirs or autobiographies. They aren't necessarily crafting a life narrative for an audience. They're simply journaling for the sake of reflection, personal insight, or even just to capture moments as they come. My question is, how do you think the act of journaling, purely for oneself, contributes to an individual's sense of meaning in life, even if there's no overt narrative or story being constructed for others?
Yeah, I don't think that you need to have an audience for your story in order for your life to be meaningful. I also don't think that you need to write it down, right? A lot of storytelling happens internally, totally silently in one's head. I'm a writer, so I tend to, talk about writing life stories as being meaningful. But you could never pick up a pen at all, but still spin a narrative about your life, have an understanding of your present experience in the context of your past and your projected future. That's really the key thing that matters, I think. And the writing is a bit of an incidental thing that you do afterwards. It makes it easier to transmit your story to others, but it's not really necessary.
So an audience is one way in which other people show up in my story, right? My story isn't just about me. But there are other ways in which other people show up, right? So other people show up in my story as core elements of the story. Maybe part of my story is, the story of finding my life partner. Something incredibly important to my story. Of course, hopefully I'm also important to their story. But, there's also folks that I care about and I'm trying to help, right? Martin Luther King, a lot of other people show up in his story, were he to tell one, about, whom he was able to help. Or there's also inspirations. There are people who are obstacles. There's oppressors. What do we owe such people in our stories, right? Do we owe something to the people in our lives, not necessarily to our oppressors, but certainly to our life partners, to our inspirations and so on, to get it right about them? Can I just tell my own story which is also a story of you. It's also a story of Ray, of Devon, of all kinds of other people. Can I just tell it any way I want, or do I have some kind of moral responsibility?
Yeah, there is this danger, right? People talk about the main character complex, right? Where you start seeing your life as a story and yourself as the main protagonist, and you get a bit of a hero complex as a result, and think of others as mere, instruments or side characters. I think that's unhealthy. A truthful story, one that actually reflected the facts, would, as you're saying, Josh, include important roles for everyone else and not have you always in the driving seat or the star position. So it's important, if you're going to tell a truthful life story, that you recognize the role of others in your life. And it's also important for them that you don't misrepresent your relations to them or things that they've done, especially if you're writing it down and telling the story to others. There's some big ethical worries that might come up that way. I think being responsible to the other people in your story is a really important ethical demand. And it's important for meaning too. I don't think any human life can be meaningful without being deeply connected to the lives of other humans. So telling that story accurately is both meaningful and ethical.
Another connection that I've seen people draw between sort of narrative and other people involves people who are unable, either temporarily or permanently, to tell their own narrative. So like really small children, adults suffering from dementia, people with really serious disabilities. So one story I've heard about them, I think the philosopher Hilda Lindemann is really good on this, is that people like this still have meaningful lives. And part of what gives them meaning is that other people can supply some of the ingredients in their narrative. Like a small child is somebody's child that they value and love. And an older adult with dementia is somebody who has done a lot of things that their relatives can tell stories about. Do you agree with Lindemann there?
Yeah, I really like that idea. So you don't have to be the narrator in order to receive meaning narratively, something like that. I think that is definitely true. And I'd also say, I think something I said earlier, which is that I don't think that narrative is necessary for a meaningful life. You can lead a meaningful life without telling a story. It's only one aspect of what it is to live meaningfully. So non-storytellers can still have meaning-rich lives for many other reasons. The kinds of relationships they're in, the experiences they have, the projects that they have, the virtues they display. So yeah, I think it's also important to recognize that some people are more narrative than others. So we're not talking about people who are unable to narrate maybe, but some people are more narratively inclined. And I don't think that quality alone means that you're necessarily going to live a more meaningful life than someone who's less narratively inclined.
But let's say you are narratively inclined, and you have a choice between making an effort to tell your story in your way on the one hand, and on the other hand, just kind of adopting an off-the-shelf story, the kind of story that your parents might tell about you, the kind of story your community might tell about you, a story belonging to an age-old narrative tradition, like a conversion narrative or something like that. Is there any additional value to telling my story in my way, or is it just as good or even better to adopt a kind of time-worn, time-honored form?
Yeah, so the lazier option is just to take one off the shelf, and maybe also the less interesting option. So, yeah, I think telling a story that is not entirely conventional, has some unique and idiosyncratic elements that you have created yourself. Might be a life that has that kind of story in it, or active storytelling in it. Might be more interesting. It might be more authentic in certain ways, more creative. So those values are going to be could be higher. But I do think there's just something to the basic act of storytelling, provided, again, that the story fits your life, that provides a kind of a pretty high baseline level of meaning. I'm not sure if I want to say that a life is necessarily more meaningful if it has a more interesting story, even though it might have more value in other ways.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life with Helena de Bres from Wellesley College, author of Philosophy in the First Person.
Is anything stopping you from finding meaning in life? What could make it easier? Is meaning available to some and not others?
Making room for meaning, plus commentary from Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher, when Philosophy Talk continues.
A little glimpse of nothingness, sucking meaning from the rest of this mask. Yes, 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 it was beautifully meaningless. Yes, 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 it was profoundly meaningless.
Is a life with a clear narrative a life less meaningless? I'm Josh Landy, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ray Briggs. Our guest is Helena de Bres from Wellesley College, and we're thinking about narrative and the meaning of life.
We've got an email from James. James writes, "There's an initial key to the meaning of life, which lies in present moment awareness. This is the witnessing of events without thought, definition, description, words, or reflections, where one is simply in a state of awe. This moment of awe escapes us as soon as we add a thought, a word, or a story to what we witnessed. This state of awe is what gives life meaning. Hard to convey in a story. You had to have been there." What do you think? It's kind of an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I'm actually very sympathetic to that kind of concern. So some philosophers who talk about the importance of narrative to meaning in life claim that we have to have like a really interesting kind of plot-rich, very active, challenging life, full of, exciting pursuits, developing of capacities over time, earlier chapters building on later chapters, so that we have a very an interesting action-adventure story going on. And one thing I don't like about the idea that is crucial for the meaning-giving power of narrative is that there are plenty of lives that don't look like that, seem to me to be very meaningful. So I do think it's important to recognize we don't need to have that traditional kind of Western structure. You can think of it as a kind of Aristotelian arc too. A protagonist goes out into the world, faces conflicts, achieves results in various ways, has a crisis, recovers. Instead something that's quieter than that. But I think that no one lives their life pure meditating continuously. Like even monks have to do some stuff in between the meditation, right? So I think you can still tell a story about a life that is primarily presence-focused or experiential. And again, maybe, some people who really don't find narrative to be necessary, I'm open to that. But I do think most of us are going to need to tell at least a minimal story about how the various pieces of our lives hold together.
Helena, the structure that you've been criticizing is the one that I've heard a lot called the hero's journey, which is a genre, and it's a really popular genre. And I think you've given some really good reasons why I might not want to pick it as like the only available narrative for my life. I can think of other narratives that I might not want for my life. Maybe I don't want to live out an academic satire because that's a little embarrassing for me. I kind of think that romantic comedy is actually a pretty morally criticizable narrative, and I don't like it. Do you think that there are better and worse genres to model your life after?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how what you're building into the idea of genre, right? There are certain very general shapes that you might point to that may not be morally problematic, but nonetheless there's versions of them that are prevalent that are. So the romantic comedy is a super heteronormative structure. So you might think, there's something appealing about the more background abstract features of that type of genre, but I don't like the particular values that tend to be associated with it. I don't know that I think of any genre as being inherently bad, but there's certainly particular instances of those genres that you might worry about for ethical reasons.
Yeah, you don't have to write a bad romantic comedy.
Right, yeah.
Yeats had this great line, "Being Irish, I have an abiding sense of tragedy which sustains me through temporary periods of joy." Nice. So I'm not sure I'd want to adopt tragedy, but it's really interesting to think about these different possibilities, right? But let's lean a bit more into the kind of question that James was asking. I mean, what about just setting aside the whole notion of narrative and focusing on these moments of awe, or focusing on just doing good, right? Not constructing some narrative for oneself, whether funding or creating that narrative, but just looking out into the world, seeing what needs to be done and trying to do it. This is something that the writer Larissa McFarquhar pointed out to me when I was trying to sell the virtues of narrative. She says, look, just do what needs to be done, right? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with thinking about one's character, turn yourself into a good person, and doing good deeds, what needs to be done?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a pluralist about values. So I think when you're thinking about how to live, you want to think about how to live ethically. You want to think about how to live from the perspective of your own self-interest or happiness. You might want to think about how to live aesthetically, how to live a beautiful life. And I think another dimension is meaning. And I don't think that you have to do all of those things. Maybe ethics you have to do. I think to lead a good life, you should lead a moral life. You should try to. But maybe if you're the kind of person who's primarily focused on helping others or exhibiting certain kinds kinds of virtue or producing value in the world, maybe it doesn't matter very much to you that you also live meaningfully. I think it's kind of tricky because one source of meaning often is the pursuit of ethically valuable projects. So saying, oh, I don't want to live meaningfully, I just want to do really important good stuff in the world, that sounds to me like a false dichotomy. So some more thinking to do there about what exactly the alternative is, I think.
So, Helena, I want to think about another potential objection that somebody could give to the idea that narrative makes life meaningful. You might worry that not everybody has equal access to narrative. Like, it's great if you had the luxury of going to a liberal arts college and you've got a lot of leisure time to tell stories about yourself. But what if you're working 2 jobs and you're just sort of trying to attain a basic level of survival? Does that mean that your life is less meaningful? And isn't that kind of elitist?
Yeah, this question comes up a lot in my class that I teach on meaning in life. So my students are at a liberal arts college. They tend to be relatively privileged, most of them. But they're also very concerned about being too caught up in their own privilege. And they really don't like the suggestion that some lives might be more meaningful than others, because they think it's suggesting that, some of us are living these noble, admirable, worthwhile existences, and other people, aren't. And that seems to be dissing those at the lower end. And the thing I usually say to that is that it's actually not a very progressive thing to say to someone, you're doing fine, you're destitute, you don't have enough money, you're oppressed in various ways, the government is messing up your life, but it's fine, you're living meaningfully, we're not worried about that. I think really the progressive thing to do is to say we want to make sure that everyone in our society has the material conditions needed to pursue relationships and projects that they care about. So that's not saying that people who don't have those resources don't matter, or they're worthless, or they're not important. It's saying they are super important, and in order to treat them decently as fellow members of our community, we need to make sure that they have what they need to pursue worthwhile lives.
Right. I mean, for me, it's kind of a combo where I wouldn't want in any way to rule out the possibility for everyone to live a life that's meaningful, while at the same time urging our, the powers that be to try to create a society in which it's easier for people to live that life, to live the life they would really want to live if they were able to.
Yeah, and I do think we do have to guard as philosophers against this tendency to think that the most meaningful lives are ones that are involved.
Guess what? It's a philosopher.
It turns out it's a philosopher, as Plato suggested. We're at the top there. We should be reading a lot, and we should be living out. So yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I think there are many, many different ways to live a meaningful life, and some of them don't look at all like the life of a privileged liberal arts professor. But they do require some resources. It is super hard to live meaningfully if you don't have enough to eat. So
what should society be doing? I mean, some people think we're living in a time when more people than ever are deprived of the ability to live a meaningful life. I worry a little bit about AI killing off a bunch of art-related jobs, for example. Yeah. Whether or not we're in a time of crisis, what do you think that society should be doing to foster the conditions for people to live meaningful lives?
Yeah, that is a huge question. One part of it, at least, is that I think that we should recognize meaning as an important thing. We live in a society that privileges, instant gratification, entertainment 24/7, the most efficient way getting to the most lucrative outcome. All these goals that don't feel they feel superficial in many ways. So I think one thing we need to do is remind ourselves that being a human isn't just a matter of accumulating a bunch of stuff. It's also a matter of engaging in projects and relationships that really matter. So part of ensuring that our society continues to provide the conditions for meaning is that we need to make sure that we continue to emphasize its importance. And then on top of that, we need to make sure that everyone has the basic resources that they need to pursue things that matter to them and that are worthwhile.
Do you have a piece of advice for listeners of ours who are looking to lead more meaningful lives?
the account of meaning in life that appeals most to me is the one that Susan Wolf offers. So she presents two alternatives and she goes for a combo hybrid option. So one answer to the question, how do I have meaning in life, is to say just follow your dreams. I don't know that that's enough. As, if you're the grass counter who's spending his entire day pursuing his dream of counting grass, I'm not sure that you're living a super meaningful life. The other option is to pursue something that's larger than yourself. So try to find a goal that is intrinsically worthwhile. And she says, I don't know that that's quite right either, because it seems to matter that you care about it. It's not easy to lead a meaningful life if you're totally emotionally detached from the thing that you're pursuing, even if it seems to be objectively worthwhile. So she says, we need two things. We need to smash those together. We need to pursue things that we care about that are also worthwhile. So meaning in life occurs when subjective attraction meets objective attractiveness. So my advice to someone looking to increase meaning in life is to think about the range of things that they love to do, and then pick one that also seems to be objectively worthwhile. So if you can do both of those two things at once, then you're a good way towards finding meaning in your own life.
Well, that is fantastic advice, and what a wonderful way to end this conversation. Helena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Our guest has been Helena de Bres, professor of philosophy at Wellesley College and author of Philosophy in the First Person. So, Ray, what are you thinking now?
Well, Josh, I'm sort of torn between going out into the world and taking care of the people around me and spending a nice afternoon reading short stories. But I think those both seem like really great options.
We can do a bit of both, right? And, I think back to the listener Mark's question about journaling, and which, inevitably reminds me of Oscar Wilde's lovely line, I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on the train. So, can we do it all? I don't know. We'll put links to everything we've mentioned today on our completely revamped website, philosophytalk.org. While you're there, you can also subscribe to our feed for free. Or you can support us with a premium subscription and question everything in our library of more than 600 episodes.
Now, a man who can tell his life story in 1 minute flat. It's Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. We just left a golden age of memoir. Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance was leading that parade. I was going to read it since Vance and I come from similar rural environments, and I wanted insight into my own story, which I hope will become a copyrighted feature. But then I saw the previews for the movie in which Glenn Close, playing Vance's grandma, sports a crappy perm that made her a dead ringer for my Aunt Charlotte. Long gone now, bless her heart. A bad perm is like a drug overdose, only it's your hair. The whole thing put a crimp in my appreciation. If Glenn Close had shaved her head and got a spider tattoo, it would have been different. That would have just screamed methamphetamine, to me at least. And that's what you want in this kind of story. Or, of course, all kinds of stories are big these days. Stories are important in therapy, your personal growth. You keep journals, put yourself into your own story, own your life, or take somebody else's story, embrace it through the miracle of hero worship, and the next thing you know, you're the next Ronald Reagan. Popular stories these days are victim stories. People of color growing up with racism, people with health issues learning to cope, weight loss strategies, immigrants dealing with the trauma of a new country that hates them. Did I read that book? Anyway, the culture grew weary of itself, or conservatives grew weary of it and made a lot of noise, which led to a backlash against woke, which is what Disney did to Star Wars. Also, MAGA got rid of DEI and made sure that white people got hiring priority. That might be a glorious story if white people were the very best at doing things, but even in the stories we tell ourselves, that's not true. Look at Macbeth. He's not a model of resource management, the number one job of modern leadership. On the other hand, my father, an excellent white person, got a medal during World War II for rearranging the filing system of the officer to whom he was assigned. Changed the course of the war. Well, changed the course of logistics in his area of the supply chain of the war. Audie Murphy, of course, was the most decorated hero of World War II because he killed a couple hundred Germans. My dad did his part. Our warriors and enforcers seem to be led by weenies right now, not to name names, incompetent at their jobs. They seem to be yelling at people who work for them. But okay, we have some real-life stories, rags to riches, you might say. Most recently, Barry Weiss, who went from being a discontented opinion writer at the New York Times to maybe ruining CBS News. And she's a lesbian. She's in the good graces of the powers that be, despite the ban on gays in the military or whatever. Conservatives have tried to make up their own stories from the cultural rubble left them by George Soros and RuPaul, but they ended up with Jim Caviezel. And other guys who want to be Walker, Texas Ranger, when they're too old, fat, or they've gone off the deep end, like Steven Seagal. Woke may be problematic, but MAGA remains a problem. Also, Trump's promise to end woke may have gone over with MAGA, but half of America kind of wants to be woke. Sure, maybe we privately want to beat up blind people on the street because they're in the way of fat, wheezing guys as they wrestle tortilla wranglers on planes to Bolivia. That's what Stephen Miller wants and hates anybody who says, hey, bud, wait a sec. But what is his story? A Jewish Nazi? Well, yeah, such things can be, or maybe not. Trans are not women. Bisexuals are not gay. Kamala Harris is fake black. Who gets to tell those stories? Free speech, I guess. The murder of Charlie Kirk led to an hysterical insistence on him as a saintly figure. which doesn't seem true to me. The great retribution system that is now our Justice Department has been accusing Trump's enemies of the things for which he himself has been accused. Can't find a lawyer who can put it all together for him, but he has larded the outfit with idiots, so the system might work, or will, once the system has achieved true idiocracy. I can't let go of Barry Weiss, though. From opinionator to head of CBS News, why didn't I get that job? I'm a dissatisfied minor league media presence. It's because I'm not a lesbian, isn't it? That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of KALW San Francisco Bay Area and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University. Copyright 2025.
Our executive producer is James Cass. The senior producer is Devin Strolovich. Laura McGuire is the Director of Research and Advancement.
Thanks also to Merle Kessler, Angela Johnston, Karen Ajluni, Steve Choi, and Linda Fagan.
Special thanks to Emma Lozman-Plum, Michael Aparicio, Tom Lockhart, Matt Porter, and John Lehman.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University and from the members of KALW Local Public Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed
or misexpressed
on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
Not even when they're true and reasonable. The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org, where you can become a subscriber and question everything in our library of more than 600 episodes. I'm Ray Briggs.
And I'm Josh Landy. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.